Throughout the pages of history, certain names remain etched in controversy. Some call them heroes, others call them villains. Some see them as revolutionaries, while others brand them as tyrants. The question is, what makes a leader controversial? Does history always tell the truth, or is it simply the story written by the victors? Today, we're diving deep into the lives of leaders whose beliefs, ideologies, and hunger for power changed the fate of millions. Some ruled in the name of religion, others carved their legacy on the battlefield, and some built empires by crushing their own people under iron fists. But here's where it gets fascinating. A hero in one nation is a villain in another. The same leader worshipped by one generation is condemned by the next. So what is the truth? To understand history, we need to look beyond facts. We need to understand perspective. In this video, we'll explore the rise and fall of controversial leaders, the beliefs that drove them, the wars they waged, and the legacies they left behind. By the end, you'll see that history isn't just black and white. It's a complex tapestry woven with power, faith, ambition, and sometimes blood. So buckle up, because this journey through time is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about leadership, morality, and history itself. Now, what exactly makes a leader controversial? Is it their actions, their intentions, or simply the way history remembers them? The truth is, controversy is born from conflict. Conflict of ideologies, conflict of interests, and conflict of perspectives. A leader becomes controversial when their decisions spark debate that lasts far beyond their lifetime. When some people see vision, while others see destruction. When some see liberation, while others see oppression. Think about it. A military general who wins a war is celebrated as a hero by his nation, but the losing side remembers him as a ruthless invader. A revolutionary who overthrows a corrupt regime is praised by the oppressed, but condemned by those who lost their privileges. A religious leader who unifies believers under one faith is revered as a prophet by followers, but feared as a fanatic by outsiders. Power plays a massive role here. The more power a leader wields, the more lives they impact, and the more controversial they become. When a leader holds absolute authority, every decision they make ripples through generations. Their laws, their wars, their beliefs, they shape nations, cultures, and sometimes entire continents. Ideology is another key factor. Leaders driven by strong beliefs, whether political, religious, or philosophical, often polarize societies. Their followers see them as visionaries who dared to challenge the status quo. Their opponents see them as dangerous radicals who disrupted peace and order. And then there's the lens of time. History is constantly being rewritten. What was once acceptable becomes unforgivable. What was once heroic becomes horrific. The same leader can be judged very differently depending on when and where you're standing in history. So when we talk about controversial leaders, we're not just talking about their actions. We're talking about the clash of narratives, the battle of perspectives, and the eternal question, who gets to decide what's right and what's wrong? Let's now turn our attention to a fascinating category of controversial leaders, those who ruled in the name of religion and belief. These were figures whose authority wasn't just political or military, it was divine, or at least they claimed it was. Religious leaders throughout history have wielded immense power because they didn't just control governments, they controlled hearts and minds. When a leader convinces people that they speak for God, their words become commandments, their wars become holy crusades, their enemies become heretics. Take, for example, the Crusades of medieval Europe. Leaders who called for these wars believed they were fighting to reclaim sacred lands and defend Christianity. To their followers, they were righteous warriors of God. But to the people they invaded, slaughtered, and displaced, they were barbaric conquerors hiding behind the cross. Or consider the Spanish Inquisition, where religious authorities tortured and executed thousands in the name of purifying the faith. To the Church, this was necessary to protect Catholicism from heresy. To the victims, Jews, Muslims, and even Christians accused of witchcraft, it was terror and genocide. Then there are leaders who used religious identity to unify and mobilize entire nations. Some brought education, culture, and moral structure to societies that desperately needed it. They built institutions, preserved knowledge, and inspired millions to live with purpose and discipline. But here's the paradox. The same belief system that inspires devotion and unity can also justify violence and intolerance. When a leader claims divine authority, questioning them becomes blasphemy, dissent becomes sin, and suddenly, faith, which is supposed to bring peace, becomes a tool of control and conflict. These leaders were loved by those who shared their beliefs and feared by those who didn't. They created legacies that are still debated in religious and historical circles today. Were they true believers acting on divine will, or were they simply using religion as a convenient mask for power and control? The answer, as always, depends on who you ask. Now, let's shift gears and talk about military leaders, the generals, conquerors, and warlords who shaped history through war. These are the figures often celebrated for their strategic brilliance, their courage, and their ability to lead armies into impossible victories. But they're also the ones responsible for unimaginable destruction, suffering, and loss of life. So the question arises, are they heroes of war or architects of destruction? Think about Alexander the Great. He conquered vast territories, spread Greek culture across 3 continents, and became one of the most legendary military commanders in history. To many, he was a genius, a visionary who dreamed of uniting the world under one empire. But to the countless soldiers and civilians who died in his campaigns, to the cities burned and cultures erased, was he really great, or was he just another ambitious conqueror with a god complex? Or take Napoleon Bonaparte. He reformed France, revolutionized military tactics, and inspired millions with his rise from obscurity to emperor. But his wars plunged Europe into decades of bloodshed, killed millions, and left entire nations in ruins. France remembers him as a hero. The rest of Europe remembers him as a tyrant who couldn't stop until he lost everything. Then there are leaders like Genghis Khan, whose Mongol empire was built on terror and conquest. His armies swept across Asia and Europe, leaving destruction in their wake. Entire cities were massacred, cultures were wiped out. Yet he also created one of the most organized empires in history, established trade routes, promoted religious tolerance, and connected the East and West in ways never seen before. So what do we make of this? Can military genius justify mass death? Does victory erase the bloodshed? Does the end justify the means? These leaders believed in their missions. They saw themselves as destiny's chosen instruments. They didn't see themselves as villains. They saw themselves as necessary forces of change, bringing order to chaos, even if that order required crushing everything in their path. But for every victory celebrated, there were thousands of families torn apart, villages burned, and futures stolen. The glory of conquest often comes at the price of human suffering. And while history remembers the battles won, it sometimes forgets the lives lost. So when we call someone a great military leader, we need to ask, great for whom and at what cost?
This brings us to one of the darkest chapters in modern history, the rise of dictators who promised stability, progress, and greatness, but delivered oppression, fear, and totalitarian control. These were leaders who rose to power during times of crisis, when economies collapsed, when societies were fractured, when people were desperate for someone, anyone, to restore order. And in walked the strong man, the authoritarian, the dictator who said, "Trust me, give me absolute power, and I will fix everything." At first, many of these leaders were genuinely popular. They gave stirring speeches, they promised jobs, security, and national pride. They built infrastructure, revived industries, and made their nations feel powerful again. People cheered, they believed, they surrendered their freedoms willingly, thinking it was a fair trade for stability. But then, slowly, the mask slipped. Dissent was silenced, opposition was crushed. The media became a propaganda machine. Secret police roamed the streets. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Fear became the tool of governance, and control became absolute. Think about leaders like Stalin, who transformed the Soviet Union into an industrial superpower, but at the cost of millions of lives lost to famine, purges, and labor camps. Or Hitler, who rebuilt Germany's economy and military, but used that power to ignite the deadliest war in history and orchestrate the Holocaust, one of humanity's greatest atrocities. Or consider leaders like Mao Zedong, whose Cultural Revolution aimed to reshape Chinese society but resulted in chaos, persecution, and the deaths of millions. He's still revered by many in China as the father of modern China, but his policies caused suffering on an unimaginable scale. What's chilling is how these leaders maintained control. They didn't just use force, they manipulated minds. They created cults of personality, where their faces were on every wall, their words were gospel, and questioning them was treason. They rewrote history, controlled education, and shaped entire generations to believe their version of reality. And here's the tragic part. Many people genuinely believed in them. They thought their leader was saving the nation. They thought the sacrifices were necessary. They thought the ends justified the means. But unchecked power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what starts as a promise of stability often ends in tyranny, bloodshed, and eventual collapse. Let's now explore another deeply controversial category: colonial leaders who expanded empires in the name of civilization, progress, and enlightenment. But were they really civilizers, or were they exploiters disguising greed as benevolence? Colonial leaders justified their conquests by claiming they were bringing education, infrastructure, and modern governance to backward societies. They built railways, established legal systems, introduced new technologies, and spread their languages and cultures across continents. But at what cost? Behind the facade of civilization was brutal exploitation. Indigenous populations were enslaved, their land stolen, their resources plundered, and their cultures systematically destroyed. Entire civilizations that had thrived for thousands of years were dismissed as primitive and inferior. Take, for example, the British Empire. Leaders like Winston Churchill are celebrated as heroes in Britain for their leadership during World War II. But in colonies like India, Churchill is remembered for policies that led to the Bengal famine, which killed millions. He believed in racial superiority and saw colonial subjects as lesser beings. Or consider King Leopold II of Belgium, whose rule over the Congo Free State resulted in one of history's worst atrocities. Millions of Congolese people were killed or mutilated in the rubber trade. Yet, back in Europe, he was seen as a philanthropist and a civilizer. Spanish conquistadors like Hernán Cortés are remembered for their daring conquests of the Aztec Empire, but they also brought disease, destruction, and death to indigenous populations. They erased cultures, burned books, and forced conversions at the point of a sword. Colonial leaders left behind mixed legacies. Yes, they built infrastructure, but it was designed to extract wealth, not benefit the local people. Yes, they introduced education, but it was meant to create compliant subjects, not empower independent thinkers. Yes, they established governments, but those governments served the empire, not the people. Today, former colonies still grapple with the consequences of colonialism. Borders drawn with no regard for ethnic or cultural realities, economies structured to serve foreign interests, and deep scars of cultural loss and trauma. So when we talk about colonial leaders, we must ask, were they visionaries who connected the world, or were they simply thieves and oppressors with better PR? Here's where things get even more complex. leaders who are celebrated as national heroes in their own countries, but condemned as villains on the global stage. How does this happen? How can the same person be seen so differently depending on where you're standing? The answer lies in nationalism, propaganda, and the stories nations tell themselves. Every country builds its identity around certain historical figures. These leaders become symbols of pride, resistance, and identity. To criticize them is seen as betraying the nation itself. Take, for instance, leaders who fought for independence from colonial rule. In their home countries, they're revered as freedom fighters who liberated their people from oppression. But to the former colonial powers, they might be remembered as rebels, terrorists, or threats to stability. Or consider authoritarian leaders who maintained order and economic growth in their nations, but committed human rights abuses in the process. Domestically, they might be praised for bringing prosperity and security. Internationally, they're condemned for their violations of freedom and dignity. This duality shows how powerful national narratives are. Governments control how history is taught. Textbooks glorify certain figures and omit uncomfortable truths. Monuments and holidays keep their legacies alive. Criticizing these figures becomes taboo, even dangerous. But global perspectives don't always align with national myths. International historians, human rights organizations, and foreign governments often see these leaders very differently. They judge them by universal standards of justice, morality, and human rights, standards that don't always match local narratives. This creates a fascinating tension. Who gets to judge history? Should we respect how nations remember their own heroes, even if those heroes committed atrocities? Or should there be universal standards that apply to everyone, regardless of nationality? There's no easy answer, but what's clear is that history is always political. It's shaped by who's in power, who's writing the story, and who's listening. But here's what history teaches us again and again. No matter how powerful a controversial leader becomes, eventually they fall. The question is just how and when. Some are overthrown in violent coups, dragged from their palaces by the very people they once ruled. Others are assassinated by rivals, betrayed by those closest to them. Some flee into exile, living out their days in obscurity, watching their empires crumble from afar. And some simply die, leaving behind legacies that are immediately torn apart by historians, successors, and survivors. The pattern is clear. Unchecked power, no matter how absolute it seems, is always temporary. Leaders who rule through fear eventually face the consequences. Empires built on oppression eventually crumble, and legacies built on lies eventually get exposed.
So what can we learn from all of this? Why does history keep repeating itself? Why do societies continue to empower controversial leaders even when we know how the story ends? The answer lies in human nature. In times of crisis, fear, and uncertainty, people crave strong leadership. They want someone who promises quick solutions, who exudes confidence, who tells them everything will be okay if they just follow orders. But history teaches us to be careful what we wish for, because the leaders who promise the most are often the ones who take the most. The ones who claim to have all the answers are often the ones who silence anyone who questions them. The ones who wrap themselves in patriotism, religion, or revolution are often the ones who use those ideals as weapons. We also learned that power must be checked. No leader, no matter how charismatic or visionary, should have absolute authority. Because absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it blinds. It turns leaders into tyrants who believe their own propaganda, who surround themselves with yes men, and who lose touch with the people they're supposed to serve. And perhaps most importantly, history teaches us that memory matters. How we remember controversial leaders, how we teach future generations about them, and how we hold them accountable, all of this shapes the kind of world we build going forward.
If we glorify conquerors without acknowledging the suffering they caused, we normalize violence. If we celebrate dictators without recognizing their crimes, we excuse oppression. If we remember only the victories and forget the victims, we dishonor the dead and invite history to repeat itself. So who has the right to judge history? Is it the historians who dig through archives and piece together the facts? Is it the survivors and descendants who carry the scars? Is it the nations who build their identities around these figures? Or is it all of us, as global citizens trying to make sense of the past? The truth is, history doesn't belong to any one person or nation. It belongs to humanity. And that means we all have a responsibility to engage with it critically, honestly, and with empathy. Controversial leaders will always exist. They're a reflection of our collective fears, ambitions, and flaws. But how we remember them, how we learn from them, and how we ensure we don't repeat their mistakes, that's up to us. So as you reflect on this journey through history, ask yourself, what kind of leaders do I support? What values do I stand for? And what kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? Because history isn't just something that happened in the past, it's something we're writing right now with every choice we make. If this video challenged your perspective or taught you something new, let me know in the comments. Share your thoughts, debate the ideas, and let's keep the conversation going. And if you want more deep dives into history's most controversial topics, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Remember, history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding ourselves, our present, and the future we're building together. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking critically.